Anthem. This is goodbye, I guess. Support ended for this game on January 12th, so players can no longer access it. You can still launch the game, I believe, but you'll just be stuck at the main menu. I tried playing this with my cousin a few months before its unfortunate demise, and we played a little chunk. A few weeks later, it was approaching January, so I asked if we finish it, and we both looked at each other like, and that's nothing to do with Anthem per se, it's just we probably should have played it earlier. It would have been so rushed trying to blitz through the game with only a few weeks left. However, for the time I played, I think I've still got some material to share with you guys and talk about. So Anthem was an RPG third-person shooter, where you play as a freelancer as they call it, basically a mercenary protecting humanity from enemy factions, etc. And you can equip up to 4 different exosuits that provide you with a small artillery to ensure humanity is protected. They're called javelins. Unfortunately, I didn't get to try them all, mainly focused on the Colossus, so naturally I'd have more to say about this one, but I'll still mention them all. The Ranger is the all-rounder essentially, good offense, defense, and relatively quick movement wise. They mainly use grenades of different elements, precision missiles, tacticals, etc. Described as the beginner-friendly javelin that suits all roles. Then you have Storm, the mage capable of strong elemental damage and nuking pretty much. In essence, a glass cannon, they can float or hover longer than most other javelins and keep a bird's eye view of the battlefield while raining down heaps of damage. I believe Mike was using this javelin, he was going crazy. You have the Interceptor, better suited for close range, a sort of hit and run playstyle focused on melee attacks and applying status effects. They mainly use blades, dashing, DOT and debuffs. Probably one if not the weakest javelin in terms of taking damage, which is why you always have to be moving with this one. And lastly, you have the Colossus, the big dog and the javelin I used for most of my playthrough. The slowest of the 4 javelins, but also the tankiest. You're kinda there to take all the aggro, all the damage whilst dishing out heavy artillery back. Given that your weapons are mainly in the heavy category, you also get a shield to protect yourself from incoming damage and mortar-based signature weapons. I'm biased here because I love heavy weaponry, juggernaut-like characters in games like this, so I enjoyed using the Colossus because of that. Now if anything, I think the traversal was one of the best aspects of the game. Every javelin has these thrusters that don't actually give you unlimited airtime, you have to manage or control it yourself. Flying upwards or boosting generates more heat, and if it reaches its limit your thrusters will stop. However, flying downwards through waterfalls, flying close to the ground or traversing through some form of water will cool you down or slow the heat gain. Similar for hovering, floating around while shooting slows heat gain, and being fully stationary slows it even more. Every javelin has a different limiter here, so some may be able to float longer than others. This was a cool aspect though, I didn't float as much as I could have, but it gives a nice aesthetic when fighting enemies from a slightly elevated position. As for the core gunplay, I thought it was pretty good. Like I mentioned before, the loot system is similar to that of Destiny or Division 2 really if you played those. You've got the standard assault rifles, SMGs, shotguns, LMGs and heavy weapons that all come in different tiers of rarity. The heavy weapons were my most used, it just worked for Colossus in my opinion. Shotguns felt punchy as well, although its pump action cycle time for some versions do slow down the gameplay a bit. You know, that's if it's the only weapon you're using. Autocannons however were weapons tailored to the Colossus and felt the most fun to use. They have a spin up time, but once it's in full swing its rate of fire is insane. However, it appears your guns aren't meant to be the main star of the show. Your abilities for each javelin are the main damage dealer, or more so the ingredient to improve your overall damage, so guns can just be used to sort of chip away at enemies or finish them off. If you solely focus on just using guns, the gameplay can get sluggish, especially if you're using shotguns for example. Killing a bunch of enemies may take some time, even at close range, but if you mix your abilities in, you'll find crowd control very easy. Unfortunately, I didn't grind enough to get all the good gear to make that happen, so I did what I could with the abilities available to me. But if you've got the right loadout and you cycle your abilities strategically, you can make it so it's the only damage output you provide, removing the necessity for guns really. For example, the Colossus carries a mortar that can deploy a projectile on top of enemies depending on the element, acid, ice, lightning, fire, etc. So in most cases you can apply a DOT effect while maintaining standard gunfire on them to maximize damage output. There are other abilities in your javelin gear that can empower your team or provide deployable items to weaken enemies. Apply a debuff to them as it were, such as a shockwave that increases the damage taken to enemies caught in it. Same way as if you're in the heat of the mix, you can send out waves of electricity to easily rinse through ads. So I think this aspect of Anthem was cool because there was quite a bit to work with in terms of team composition, finding ways to make your squad as effective as possible through ad clearing. I think the only underwhelming thing was melee attacks. For me, Colossus would just slam the ground once and that was it. There wasn't really anything to follow up with or sort of chain together with another ability to make it effective. If anything, it just ruined your flow a bit, so I rarely touched it unless I'm missing something. Either way though, the combos you can pull off with friends is great.
Ooh, that was clean. That was clean.
And of course, like most looter shooters, each javelin has their own super ability of sorts. The Ranger gets a multi-mortar that fires a barrage of missiles, Storm unleashes a massive blast of elemental damage impacting a wide area, the Interceptor uses assassin blades to slice through enemies at extremely fast speeds. It's actually a cool animation, but unfortunately I didn't get around to using this class. You can think of it as similar to spectral blades from Destiny. And lastly, the Colossus gets a siege cannon, a heavy range weapon that fires up to 3 high explosive shells. Provided you actually land them within the allotted time, they do massive damage. Unlike me, he decided to fire 3 shots into the shield of this large enemy. I think there is still a bit of AoE damage even if you do hit shields, so that's cool. The missions were fairly straightforward in structure: fly to this objective, defend this area, collect these resources, kill a boss, etc. There's random world events that show up every now and again. Endgame content had strongholds where you just run through a more challenging dungeon level of sorts, then fight a boss at the end as well. Lobbies are limited to 4 players even in free roam, and I want to say it was surprising seeing some players in the same lobby I was in, but given the time we played, the game announced they're shutting down, so naturally you'd find more players lurking, especially since the game was only priced £1 for PlayStation. So with all that said, where did it go wrong with Anthem? I didn't play as much as I should have, but for the time I did, I quite enjoyed the gameplay, with the main highlight being in the traversal. Flying through the environment with a couple of friends was really satisfying. I think they did a really good job on the Javelin's mode of transport here. When I look at people's reasons for Anthem's fall off online, some say it's the wasted potential, the buggy unfinished launch it had with very limited content to work with, an identity crisis of the game never really having a set foundation on what it wants to be, the wall that every player hits when you reach endgame content, and the idea that it comes sooner than you think. Endgame content was pretty much non-existent, or it's tough competition. Destiny, The Division 2, Warframe, all tough competitors, all of which are still dropping updates to this day, or recently anyway. It's not that people hate Anthem, I think they just hate how it was treated. A game that showed promise but was ditched way too early. One thing I agree with is that it definitely showed promise. The gameplay is fun. The traversal, which I'll mention 10 times over, the gunplay, the elements and different abilities your javelin possesses, creates a nice gameplay loop. So had we seen some development, future updates, DLCs, expansions, maybe new javelins, whatever they decided to do, I think there could have been some longevity in it. It's just they didn't really do that. I think if I made more time for this game, I would have liked to have finished the story. I'll probably watch a playthrough to see what happened anyway. I know the story in itself isn't regarded as anything special, but with the game coming to an unfortunate demise, it would have been nice to see it through. Because now I'll never be able to play it, but I can still watch it, so there's that. Now I'm gonna sound quite biased here, not having finished the game. Had I played a good chunk, finished it in its entirety and played most of what was offered post-game, it's possible my tune would have been different, because I didn't see every corner of Anthem. There is still a little bit of regret because it's not possible anymore. Some will say I didn't miss much, others will say I missed out. Now I'm gonna sound quite biased here, not having finished the game. Had I played a good chunk, finished it in its entirety and played most of what was offered post-game, it's possible my tune would have been different. I'm aware a lot of people are sad with how things turned out, because there are players who genuinely liked it in spite of its flaws, and those who had high hopes for its comeback, like a Cyberpunk level comeback. But for anyone who was curious, hopefully you got to try even a little bit of it, whether that's getting on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox or whatever, or even playing at a friend's house. So yeah, that's all I got to say really. I'm a little annoyed because I did record some footage for this game ages ago, but I can't find it. Hopefully I do as of editing this video, but if not, I apologize. It would have at least diversified the video from just Colossus gameplay. But for those of you who played a bit of Anthem or a lot of Anthem, what did you guys think of it as a whole? I hope you guys enjoyed. It's been Dre, take care and see you next time.